Discovery of the tablets. The baked clay tablets and portions of tablets, which describe the views and beliefs of the Babylonians and Assyrians about the creation, were discovered by Mr. later Sir A.H. Laird, Mormazd Rassam and George Smith, assistant in the Department of Oriental Antiquities in the British Museum. They were found among the ruins of the palace and library of Ashurbanipal, BC 668 to 626, at Kuyunjik, Nineveh, between the years 1848 and 1876. Between 1866 and 1870, the great find of tablets and fragments, some 20,000 in number, which Rassam made in 1852, was worked through by George Smith, who identified many of the historical inscriptions of Shalmaneser II, Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and other kings mentioned in the Bible, and several literary compositions of a legendary character, fables, etc. In the course of this work he discovered fragments of various versions of the Babylonian legend of the deluge, and portions of several texts belonging to a work which treated of the beginning of things, and of the creation. In 1870, Rawlinson and Smith noted allusions to the creation in the important tablet K.63, but the texts of portions of tablets of the creation series at that time available for study was so fragmentary that it was impossible for these scholars to find their correct sequence. During the excavations, which Smith carried out at Kuyunjik in 1873 and 1874 for the proprietors of the Daily Telegraph and the trustees of the British Museum, he was, he tells us, fortunate enough to discover several fragments of the Genesis legends. In January 1875, he made an exhaustive search among the tablets in the British Museum, and in the following March he published, in the Daily Telegraph, March 4th, a summary of the contents of about 20 fragments of the series of tablets describing the creation of the heavens and the earth. In November of the same year he communicated to the Society of Biblical Archaeology 1 copies of 1. The texts on fragments of the first and fifth tablets of creation. 2. A text describing the fight between the gods and chaos, and 3. A fragmentary text which, he believed, described the fall of man. In the following year he published translations of all the known fragments of the Babylonian creation legends in his Chaldean account of Genesis. London, 1876, 8 volumes, with photographs. In this volume were included translations of the exploits of Gizduba, Gilgamesh, and some early Babylonian fables and legends of the gods. Publication of the creation tablets. The publication of the above-mentioned texts and translations proved beyond all doubt the correctness of Rawlinson's assertion made in 1865, that certain portions of the Babylonian and Assyrian legends of the creation resembled passages in the early chapters of the Book of Genesis. During the next 20 years, the creation texts were copied and recopied by many Assyriologists, but no publication appeared in which all the material available for reconstructing the legend was given in a collected form. In 1898, the trustees of the British Museum ordered the publication of all the creation texts contained in the Babylonian and Assyrian collections, and the late Mr. L. W. King, assistant in the Department of Egyptian and Assyrian Antiquities, was directed to prepare an edition. The exhaustive preparatory search, which he made through the collections of tablets in the British Museum, resulted in the discovery of many unpublished fragments of the creation legends, and in the identification of a fragment which, although used by George Smith, had been lost sight of for about 25 years. He ascertained also that, according to the Ninevite scribes, the tablets of the creation series were 7 in number, and what several versions of the legend of the creation, the works of Babylonian and Assyrian editors of different periods, must have existed in early Mesopotamian libraries. King's edition of the creation texts appeared in Cuneiform Texts from Babylonian Tablets in the British Museum, Part 13, London, 1901. As the scope of this work did not permit the inclusion of his translations, and commentary and notes, he published these in a private work entitled, The 7 Tablets of Creation, or the Babylonian and Assyrian Legends Concerning the Creation of the World and of Mankind, London, 1902. 8 volumes. A supplementary volume contained much new material which had been found by him since the appearance of the official edition of the texts, and in fact doubled the number of creation texts known hitherto. The object of the Babylonian legend of the creation. A perusal of the texts of the 7 tablets of creation, which King was enabled, through the information contained in them, to arrange for the first time in their proper sequence, shows that the main object of the legend was the glorification of the god Marduk, the son of Ea, Enki, as the conqueror of the dragon Tiamat, and not the narration of the story of the creation of the heavens, and earth, and man. The creation, properly speaking, is only mentioned as an exploit of Marduk in the 6th tablet, and the 7th tablet is devoted wholly to the enumeration of the honorific titles of Marduk. It is probable that every great city in Babylonia, whilst accepting the general form of the creation legend, made the greatest of its local gods the hero of it. It has long been surmised that the prominence of Marduk in the legend was due to the political importance of the city of Babylon. And we now know from the fragments of tablets, which have been excavated in recent years by German Assyriologists at Kaalat Sharkat, or Shargat, or Sha'at, that in the city of Ashur, the god Ashur, the national god of Assyria, actually occupied in texts 2 of the legend in use there the position which Marduk held in 4 of the legends current in Babylonia. There is reason for thinking that the original hero of the legend was Enlil, Bel, the great god of Nippur, the Nefar, or Nufar of the Arab writers, and that when Babylon rose into power under the First Dynasty, about BC 2300, his position in the legend was usurped at Babylon by Marduk. Variant forms of the Babylonian legend of the creation. The views about the creation which are described in the 7 tablets mentioned above were not the only ones current in Mesopotamia, and certainly they were not necessarily the most orthodox. Though in the version of the legend already referred to the great god of creation was Enlil, or Marduk, or Ashur, we know that in the legend of Gilgamesh, 2nd tablet, it was the goddess Aurora who created Enkidu, Eabani, from a piece of clay moistened with her own spittle. And in the so-called Bilingual version 3 of the legend, we find that this goddess assisted Marduk as an equal in the work of creating the seed of mankind. This version, although Marduk holds the position of preeminence, differs in many particulars from that given by the 7 tablets, and as it is the most important of all the texts which deal directly with the creation of the heavens and the earth, a rendering of it is here given. The bilingual version of the creation legend. 1. The Holy House. The house of the gods in the holy place had not yet been made. 2. No reed had sprung up, no tree had been made. 3. No brick had been laid, no structure of brick had been erected. 4. No house had been made, no city had been built. 5. No city had been made, no creature had been constituted. 6. Enlil's city, i.e., Nippur, had not been made, Ika had not been built. 7. Erech had not been made, Iena had not been built. 8. The deep 4, or abyss, had not been made, Eridu had not been built. 9. Of the holy house, the house of the gods, the dwelling place had not been made. 10. All the lands were sea. 11. At the time that the midmost sea was shaped like a trough. 12. At that time Eridu was made, and Esagil was built. 13. The Esagil where in the midst of the deep the god Lugal, Dul, Azaga 5 dwelleth. 14. Babylon was made, Esagil was completed. 15. The gods the Anunnaki he created at one time. 16. They proclaimed supreme the holy city, the dwelling of their heart's happiness. 17. Marduk laid a rush mat upon the face of the waters. 18. He mixed up earth and molded it upon the rush mat. 19. To enable the gods to dwell in the place where they fain would be. 20. He fashioned man. 21. The goddess Ururu with him created the seed of mankind. 22. He created the beasts of the field and all the living things in the field. 23. He created the river Idiglat, Tigris, and the river Puratu, Euphrates, and he set them in their places. 24. He proclaimed their names rightly. 25. He created grass, the vegetation of the marsh, seed and shrub. 26. He created the green plants of the plain. 27. Lands, marshes, swamps. 28. The wild cow and the calf she carried, the wild calf, the sheep and the young she carried, the lamb of the fold. 29. Plantations and shrubland. 30. The he-goat and the mountain goat. 31. The Lord Marduk piled up a dam in the region of the sea, i.e., he reclaimed land. 32. A swamp, he founded a marsh. 33. He made to be. 34. Reeds he created, trees he created. 35. In place he created. 36. He laid bricks, he built a brickwork. 37. He constructed houses, he formed cities. 38. He constructed cities, creatures he set therein. 39. Nippur he made, Ika he built. 40. Erech he made, Iana he built. The remainder of the text is fragmentary, and shows that the text formed part of an incantation which was recited in the temple of Isidra, possibly the great temple of Nabu at Borsippa. The legend of the creation according to Berosus and Damascius. Versions in Greek of the legends found by George Smith had long been known to classical scholars, owing to the preservation of fragments of them in the works of later Greek writers, example, Eusebius, Syncellus, and others. The most important of these is derived from the history of Babylonia, which was written in Greek by Berosus, a priest of Bel Marduk, i.e., the Lord Marduk, at Babylon, about 250 BC. In this work Berosus reproduced all the known historical facts and traditions derived from native sources which were current in his day. It is therefore not surprising to find that his account of the Babylonian beliefs about the origin of things corresponds very closely with that given in the cuneiform texts, and that it is of the greatest use in explaining and partly in expanding these texts. His account of the primeval abyss, out of which everything came, and of its inhabitants reads: There was a time in which there existed nothing but darkness and an abyss of waters, wherein resided most hideous beings, which were produced on a twofold principle. There appeared men, some of whom were furnished with 2 wings, others with 4, and with 2 faces. They had 1 body but 2 heads, the one that of a man, the other of a woman, and likewise in their several organs both male and female. Other human figures were to be seen with the legs and horns of goats, some had horses' feet, while others united the hindquarters of a horse with the body of a man, resembling in shape the hippocentaurs. Bulls likewise were bred there with the heads of men, and dogs with 4-toed bodies, terminated in their extremities with the tails of fishes, horses also with the heads of dogs, men too and other animals, with the heads and bodies of horses and the tails of fishes. In short, there were creatures in which were combined the limbs of every species of animals. In addition to these, fishes, reptiles, serpents, with other monstrous animals, which assumed each other's shape and countenance. Of all which were preserved delineations in the temple of Belus at Babylon. The slaughter of the Queen of the Abyss. The person who presided over them was a woman named Omiroka, which in the Chaldean language is Thalith, in Greek Thalassa, the sea, but which might equally be interpreted the moon. All things being in this situation, Belus came, and cut the woman asunder, and of one half of her he formed the earth, and of the other half the heavens, and at the same time destroyed the animals within her. All this, he says, was an allegorical description of nature. The creation of man. 4. The whole universe consisting of moisture, and animals being generated therein, the deity above mentioned 6 took off his own head, upon which the other gods mixed. The god whose head was taken off was not Belus, as is commonly thought, but the god who the cuneiform texts tell us was called Kingu, he blood, as it gushed out, with the earth, and from whence were formed men. On this account it is that they are rational and partake of divine knowledge. Belus creates the universe. This Belus, by whom they signify Jupiter, divided the darkness, and separated the heavens from the earth, and reduced the universe to order. But the animals, not being able to bear the prevalence of light, died. Belus upon this, seeing a vast space unoccupied, though by nature fruitful, commanded one of the gods to take off his head, and to mix the blood with the earth, and from thence to form other men and animals, which should be capable of bearing the air. Belus formed also the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and the 5 planets. Such, according to Polyhistor Alexander, is the account which Berosus gives in his first book. Sequoy, Ancient Fragments, London, 1832, pp 24–26. In the 6th century of our era, Damascius the Syrian, the last of the Neoplatonic philosophers, wrote in Greek in a work on the doubts and solutions of the first principles, in which he says, "But the Babylonians, like the rest of the barbarians, pass over in silence the one principle of the universe, and they conceived two, Thoth and Apison, making Apison the husband of Thoth, and denominating her the mother of the gods. And from these proceeds an only begotten son, Moimis, which I conceive is no other than the intelligible world proceeding from the two principles. From these, also, another progeny is derived, Dash and Dachus, and again, a third, Kisare and Asaurus, from which last three others proceed, Anus, and Elinus, and Aus. And of Aus and Dors is born a son called Belus, who, they say, is the fabricator of the world, the Demiurgus. Sequoy, Ancient Fragments, London, 1832, page 318. The Seven Tablets of Creation. Description of their contents. In the beginning nothing whatever existed except APS, which may be described as a boundless, confused and disordered mass of watery matter. How it came into being is unknown. Out of this mass there were evolved two orders of beings, namely, demons and gods. The demons had hideous forms, even as Berosus said, which were part animal, part bird, part reptile and part human. The gods had wholly human forms, and they represented the three layers of the comprehensible world, that is to say, heaven or the sky, the atmosphere, and the underworld. The atmosphere and the underworld together formed the earth as opposed to the sky or heaven. The texts say that the first two gods to be created were Lakmu and Lakamu. Their attributes cannot at present be described, but they seem to represent two forms of primitive matter. They appear to have had no existence in popular religion, and it has been thought that they may be described as theological conceptions containing the notions of matter and some of its attributes. After countless eons had passed, the gods Anshar and Kishar came into being. The former represents the hosts of heaven, and the latter the hosts of earth. After another long and indefinite period, the independent gods of the Babylonian pantheon came into being, example Anu, Ea, who is here called Nudimad, and others. As soon as the gods appeared in the universe, order came into being. When APS, the personification of confusion and disorder of every kind, saw this order, he took counsel with his female associate Tiamat with the object of finding some means of destroying the way, Ulkaat, or order, of the gods. Fortunately, the Babylonians and Assyrians have supplied us with representations of Tiamat, and these show us what form ancient tradition assigned to her. She is depicted as a ferocious monster with wings and scales and terrible claws, and her body is sometimes that of a huge serpent, and sometimes that of an animal. In the popular imagination, she represented all that was physically terrifying, and foul, and abominable. She was nevertheless the mother of everything, and was the possessor of the Dup Shemati, or Tablet of Destinies. No description of this tablet or its contents is available, but from its name we may assume that it was a sort of Babylonian book of fate. Theologically, Tiamat represented to the Babylonians the same state in the development of the universe as did Tohu Wa Bohu, Genesis I-2, i.e., formlessness and voidness, of primeval matter. To the Hebrews she is depicted both on bas-reliefs and on cylinder seals in a form which associates her with Labatu, a female devil that prowled about the desert at night suckling wild animals but killing men. And it is tolerably certain that she was the type, and symbol, and head of the whole community of fiends, demons and devils. In the consultation which took place between APS and Tiamat, their messenger Mummu took part of the history and attributes of this last-named god. Nothing is known. The result of the consultation was that a long struggle began between the demons and the gods, and it is clear that the object of the powers of darkness was to destroy the light. The whole story of this struggle is the subject of the 7 tablets of creation. The gods are deifications of the sun, moon, planets, and other stars, and Apsu, or chaos, and his companions the demons, are personifications of darkness, night, and evil. The story of the fight between them is nothing more nor less than a picturesque allegory of natural phenomena. Similar descriptions are found in the literatures of other primitive nations, and the story of the great fight between Hayor, the great god of heaven, and Set, the great captain of the hosts of darkness, may be quoted as an example. Set regarded the order which Hayor was bringing into the universe with the same dislike as that with which Apsu contemplated the beneficent work of Sin, the moon god, Shamash, the sun god, and their brother gods. And the hostility of Set and his allies to the gods, like that of Tiamat and her allies, was everlasting. At this point a new text fills a break in the first tablet, and describes the fight which took place between Nudimad or Ea, the representative of the established order which the rule of the gods had introduced into the domain of Apsu and Tiamat, and Apsu and his envoy Mummu. Ea went forth to fight the powers of darkness, and he conquered Apsu and Mummu. The victory over Apsu, i.e., the confused and boundless mass of primeval water, represents the setting of impassable boundaries to the waters that are on and under the earth, i.e., the formation of the ocean. The exact details of the conquest cannot be given, but we know that Ea was the possessor of the pure, or white, or holy, incantation, and that he overcame Apsu and his envoy by the utterance of a powerful spell. In the Egyptian legend of Ra and Apep, the monster is rendered spellbound by the god Hetiwati, who plays in it exactly the same part as Ea in the Babylonian legend. When Tiamat heard of Ea's victory over Apsu and Mummu, she was filled with fury, and determined to avenge the death of Apsu, her husband. The first act of Tiamat after the death of Apsu was to increase the number of her allies. We know that a certain creature called Ummukuba at once spawned a brood of devilish monsters to help her in her fight against the gods. Nothing is known of the origin or attributes of Ummukuba, but some think she was a form of Tiamat. Her brood probably consisted of personifications of mist, fog, cloud, storm, whirlwinds, and the blighting and destroying powers which primitive man associated with the desert. An exact parallel of this brood of devils is found in Egyptian mythology, where the allies of Set and Apep are called Messi Betshet, i.e., spawn of impotent revolt. They are depicted in the form of serpents, and some of them became the 9 worms of Amenti that are mentioned in the Book of the Dead, chap. IA. Not content with Ummukuba's brood of devils, Tiamat called the stars and powers of the air to her aid, for she set up 1. The viper, 2. The snake, 3. The god Lakamu, 4. The whirlwind, 5. The ravening dog, 6. The scorpion man, 7. The mighty storm wind, 8. The fishman, and 9. The horned beast. These bore 10. The merciless, invincible weapon, and were under the command of 11. Kingu, who Tiamat calls her husband. Thus Tiamat had 11 mighty helpers besides the devils spawned by 11. Amukuba. We may note in passing that some of the above-mentioned helpers appear among the 12 signs of the zodiac which Marduk set up after his conquest of Tiamat, example, the scorpion man, the horned beast, etc. This fact suggests that the first zodiac was set up by Tiamat, who with her 11 helpers formed the 12 signs. The association of evil with certain stars may date from that period. That the Babylonians regarded the primitive gods as powers of evil is clear from the fact that Lacamu, one of them, is enumerated among the allies of Tiamat. The helpers of Tiamat were placed by her under the command of a god called Kingu, who is Tammuz. He was the counterpart, or equivalent, of Anu, the sky god, in the kingdom of darkness, for it is said in the text, Kingu was exalted and received the power of Anu, i.e., he possessed the same power and attributes as Anu. When Tiamat appointed Kingu to be her captain, she recited over him a certain spell or incantation, and then she gave him the tablet of destinies and fastened it to his breast, saying, "Whatsoever goeth forth from thy mouth shall be established." Armed with all the magical powers conferred upon him by this tablet, and heartened by all the laudatory epithets which his wife Tiamat heaped upon him, Kingu went forth at the head of his devils. When Ea heard that Tiamat had collected her forces and was determined to continue the fight against the gods which Apsu and Mamu had begun, and that she had made her husband Kingu her champion, he was afflicted and sat in sorrow. He felt unable to renew the fight against the powers of darkness, and he therefore went and reported the new happenings to Anshar, representative of the host of heaven, and took counsel with him. When Anshar heard the matter, he was greatly disturbed in mind and bit his lips, for he saw that the real difficulty was to find a worthy antagonist for Kingu and Tiamat. A gap in the text here prevents us from knowing exactly what Anshar said and did, but the context suggests that he summoned Anu, the sky god, to his assistance. Then, having given him certain instructions, he sent him on an embassy to Tiamat with the view of conciliating her. When Anu reached the place where she was, he found her in a very wrathful state, and she was muttering angrily. Anu was so appalled at the sight of her that he turned and fled. It is impossible at present to explain this interlude, or to find any parallel to it in other ancient Oriental literature. When Anu reported his inability to deal with Tiamat, a council of the gods was called, and Ea induced his son, Marduk, to be present. We next find Anshar in converse with the god Marduk, who offers to act as the champion of the gods and to fight Tiamat and her allies. Marduk, being a form of the sun god, the greatest of all the powers of light, thus becomes naturally the protagonist of the gods, and the adversary of Tiamat and her powers of darkness. Then Anshar summoned a great council of the gods, who forthwith met in a place called Upshakinaku, which may be described as the Babylonian Olympus. It was all-important for Marduk to appear at the council of the gods before he undertook his task, because it was necessary for him to be formally recognized by them as their champion, and he needed to be endowed by them with magical powers. The primitive gods Lakmu and Lakamu, and the Igigi, or who may be regarded as star gods, were also summoned. A banquet was prepared, and the gods attended, and having met and kissed each other they sat down, and ate bread and drank hot and sweet sesame wine. The fumes of the wine confused their senses, but they continued to drink, and at length their spirits were exalted. They appointed Marduk to be their champion officially, and then they proceeded to invest him with the power that would cause every command he spake to be followed immediately by the effect which he intended it to produce. Next Marduk, with the view of testing the new power which had been given him, commanded a garment to disappear, and it did so, and when he commanded it to reappear, it did so. Then the gods saluted him as their king, and gave him the insignia of royalty, namely, the scepter, the throne and the pala, whatever that may be. And as they handed to him these things, they commanded him to go and hack the body of Tiamat in pieces, and to scatter her blood to the winds. Thereupon Marduk began to arm himself for the fight. He took a bow, a spear, and a club. He filled his body full of fire and set the lightning before him. He took in his hands a net wherewith to catch Tiamat, and he placed the four winds near it, to prevent her from escaping from it when he had snared her. He created mighty winds and tempests to assist him, and grasped the thunderbolt in his hand, and then, mounting upon the storm, which was drawn by 4 horses, he went out to meet and defeat Tiamat. It seems pretty certain that this description of the equipment of Marduk was taken over from a very ancient account of the fight with Tiamat, in which the hero was Enlil, i.e., the god of the air, or of the region which lies between heaven and hell. Marduk approached and looked upon the middle, or inside, or womb, of Tiamat 1:1, and divined the plan of Kingu, who had taken up his place therein. In the 7th tablet, L108, Marduk is said to have entered into the middle of Tiamat, and because he did so he is called Nibiru, i.e., he who entered in, and the Caesar of the middle. What the words, middle of Tiamat, meant to the Babylonian we are not told, but it is clear that Marduk's entry into it was a signal mark of the triumph of the god. When Kingu from the middle of Tiamat saw Marduk arrayed in his terrible panoply of war, he was terrified and trembled, and staggered about and lost all control of his legs, and at the mere sight of the god all the other fiends and devils were smitten with fear and reduced to helplessness. Tiamat saw Marduk and began to revile him, and when he challenged her to battle, she flew into a rage and attempted to overthrow him by reciting an incantation, thinking that her words of power would destroy his strength. Her spell had no effect on the god, who at once cast his net over her. At the same moment he made a gale of foul wind to blow on her face, and entering through her mouth it filled her body. Whilst her body was distended he drove his spear into her, and Tiamat split asunder, and her womb fell out from it. Marduk leaped upon her body and looked on her followers as they attempted to escape. But the 4 winds which he had stationed round about Tiamat made all their efforts to flee of no effect. Marduk caught all the 11 allies of Tiamat in his net, and he trampled upon them as they lay in it helpless. Marduk then took the tablet of destinies from Kingu's breast, and sealed it with his seal and placed it on his own breast. Then returning to the dead body of Tiamat, he smashed her skull with his club and scattered her blood to the north wind, and as a reward for his destruction of their terrible foe, he received gifts and presents from the gods his fathers. The text then goes on to say that Marduk devised a cunning plan, i.e., he determined to carry out a series of works of creation. He split the body of Tiamat into 2 parts, out of one half he fashioned the dome of heaven, and out of the other he constructed the abode of Nudimad, or Ea, which he placed over against Apsu, i.e., the deep. He also formulated regulations concerning the maintenance of the same. By this cunning plan, Marduk deprived the powers of darkness of the opportunity of repeating their revolt with any chance of success. Having established the framework of his new heaven and earth, Marduk, acting as the celestial architect, set to work to furnish them. In the first place he founded Ishara, or the mansion of heaven, and next he set apart and arranged proper places for the old gods of the three realms Anu, Bel and Ea. The text of the fifth tablet, which would undoubtedly have supplied details as to Marduk's arrangement and regulations for the sun, the moon, the stars, and the signs of the zodiac in the heavens, is wanting. The prominence of the celestial bodies in the history of creation is not to be wondered at, for the greater number of the religious beliefs of the Babylonians are grouped round them. Moreover, the science of astronomy had gone hand in hand with the superstition of astrology in Mesopotamia from time immemorial, and at a very early period the oldest gods of Babylonia were associated with the heavenly bodies. Thus the Anunnaki and the Igigi, who are bodies of deified spirits, were identified with the stars of the northern and southern heaven, respectively. And all the primitive goddesses coalesced and were grouped to form the goddess Ishtar, who was identified with the evening and morning star, or Venus. The Babylonians believed that the will of the gods was made known to men by the motions of the planets, and that careful observation of them would enable the skilled seer to recognize in the stars favorable and unfavorable portents. Such observations, treated from a magical point of view, formed a huge mass of literature which was being added to continually. From the nature of the case, this literature enshrined a very considerable number of facts of pure astronomy, and as early as the period of the First Dynasty, about 2000 BC, the Babylonians were able to calculate astronomical events with considerable accuracy, and to reconcile the solar and lunar years by the use of epagomenal months. They had by that time formulated the existence of the zodiac, and fixed the stations of the moon, and the places of the planets with it, and they had distinguished between the planets and the fixed stars. In the fifth tablet of the creation series, L2, the signs of the zodiac are called Lumashi 12, but unfortunately no list of their names is given in the context. Now these are supplied by the little tablet, number 77,821, of the Persian period, of which a reproduction is here given. It has been referred to and discussed by various scholars, and its importance is very great. The transcript of the text, which is now published, see page 68, for the first time, will be acceptable to the students of the history of the zodiac. Egyptian, Greek, Syriac and Arabic astrological and astronomical texts all associate with the signs of the zodiac 12 groups, each containing 3 stars, which are commonly known as the 36 decans. 1. The text of line 4 of the 5th tablet of the creation series proves that the Babylonians were acquainted with these groups of stars, for we read that Marduk set up for the 12 months of the year 3 stars apiece. In the list of signs of the zodiac here given, it will be seen that each sign is associated with a particular month. At a later period, say about 500 BC, the Babylonians made some of the gods regents of groups of stars, for Enlil ruled 33 stars, Anu 23 stars, and Ea 15 stars. They also possessed lists of the fixed stars, and drew up tables of the times of their heliacal risings. Such lists were probably based upon very ancient documents, and prove that the astral element in Babylonian religion was very considerable. The accompanying illustration, which is reproduced from the boundary stone of Ritti Marduk, Brit Muse, number 90858, supplies much information about the symbols of the gods, and of the signs of the zodiac in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar I, king of Babylon, about 1120 BC. Thus in Register 1, we have the star of Ishtar, the crescent of the moon god Sin, and the disk of Shamash the sun god. In Reg 2 are 3 stands, surmounted by tiaras, which represent the gods Anu, Enlil, Bel, and Ea respectively. In Reg 3 are 3 altars, or shrines, with a monster in numbers 1 and 2. Over the first is the lance of Marduk, over the second the mason's square of Nabu, and over the third is the symbol of the goddess Ninkhasag, the creatress. In Reg 4 are a standard with an animal's head, a sign of Ea, a 2-headed snake equals the twins, an unknown symbol with a horse's head, and a bird, representative of Shukamuna and Shumalia. In Reg 5 are a seated figure of the goddess Gula and the scorpion man, and in Reg 6 a forked lightning, symbol of Adad, above a bull, the tortoise, symbol of Ea, the scorpion of the goddess Ishkara, and the lamp of Nusku, the fire god. Down the left-hand side is the serpent god representing the constellation of the Hydra. The mutilated text of the 5th tablet makes it impossible to gain further details in connection with Marduk's work in arranging the heavens. We are, however, justified in assuming that the gaps in it contained statements about the grouping of the gods into triads. In royal historical inscriptions the kings often invoke the gods in threes, though they never call any one three a triad or trinity. It seems as if this arrangement of gods in threes was assumed to be of divine origin. In the 4th tablet of creation, one triad, Anu-Bel-Ea, is actually mentioned, and in the 5th tablet, another is indicated, Sin Shamash Ishtar. In these triads Anu represents the sky or heaven, Bel or Enlil the region under the sky and including the earth, Ea the underworld, Sin the moon, Shamash the sun, and Ishtar the star Venus. When the universe was finally constituted, several other great gods existed, example, Nusku, the fire god, Inerta, a solar god, Nergal, the god of war and handicrafts, Nabu, the god of learning, Marduk of Babylon, the great national god of Babylonia, and Ashur, the great national god of Assyria. When Marduk had arranged heaven and earth, and had established the gods in their places, the gods complained that their existence was barren, because they lacked worshippers at their shrines and offerings. To make a way out of this difficulty, Marduk devised another, cunning plan, and announced his intention of creating man out of blood and bone. Dami is a symptom. We have already quoted, see page 11, the statement of Berosus that man was created out of the blood of a god mixed with earth. Here, then, is the authority for his words. Marduk made known to Ea his intention of creating man, and Ea suggested that if one of the gods was sacrificed, the remainder of them should be set free from service, presumably to Marduk. Thereupon Marduk summons a council of the gods, and asks them to name the instigator of the fight in which he himself was the victor. In reply the gods named Kingu, Tiamat's second husband, whom they seized forthwith, and bound with fetters and carried to Ea, and then having inflicted punishment upon him they let his blood From Kingu's blood Ea fashioned mankind for the service of the gods. Now among the texts which have been found on the tablets at Kaalat Sharkat is an account of the creation of man which differs from the version given in the 7 tablets of creation, but has 2 features in common with it. These 2 features are, 1. The council of the gods to discuss the creation of man, 2. The sacrifice which the gods had to make for the creation of man. In the variant version 2, or more, gods are sacrificed, Ilu-Naga, i.e., the workman gods, about whom nothing is known. The place of sacrifice is specified with some care, and it is said to be Uzumue, or the bond of heaven and earth. Uzumue may be the bolt with which Marduk locked the 2 halves of Tiamat into place. The Anunnaki, wishing to give an expression of their admiration for Marduk's heroism, decided to build him a shrine or temple. To this Marduk agreed, and chose Babylon, i.e., the Gate of God, for its site. The Anunnaki themselves made the bricks, and they built the great temple of Isagila at Babylon. When the temple was finished, Marduk reenacted the scene of creation, for, as he had formerly assigned to each god his place in the heavens, so now he assigned to each god his place in Isagila. The tablet ends with a long hymn of praise which the Anunnaki sang to Marduk, and describes the summoning of an assembly of the gods to proclaim ceremonially the great 50 names of this god. Thus the gods accepted the absolute supremacy of Marduk. From the above it is clear that a dispute broke out between Marduk and the gods after he had created them, and the tradition of it has made its way into the religious literatures of the Hebrews, Syrians, Arabs, Copts, and Abyssinians. The cuneiform texts tell us nothing about the cause of the dispute, but tradition generally ascribes it to the creation of man by the supreme God, and it is probable that all the apocryphal stories which describe the expulsion from heaven of the angels who contended against God under the leadership of Satan, or Satnal, or Iblis, are derived from a Babylonian original which has not yet been found. The 50 names, or laudatory epithets mentioned above, find parallels in 75 praises of Ra, sung by the Egyptians under the Xixtch dynasty, 15, and in the 99 beautiful names of Allah, which are held in such great esteem by the Mohammedans. 16. The respect in which the 50 names were held by the Babylonians is well shown by the work of the epilogue on the 7th tablet, where it is said, "Let them be held in remembrance, let the first comer, i.e., any and every man, proclaim them, let the wise and the understanding consider them together. Let the father repeat them and teach them to his son. Let them be in the ears of the herdsman and the shepherd." The object of the writer of the 50 names was to show that Marduk was the Lord of the gods, that the power, qualities, and attributes of every god were enshrined in him, and that they all were merely forms of him. This fact is proved by the tablet, number 47,406, which contains a long list of gods who are equated with Marduk in his various forms. The tendency in the later Babylonian religion to make Marduk the god above all gods has led many to think that monotheistic conceptions were already in existence among the Babylonians as early as the period of the First Dynasty, about 2000 BC. It is indisputable that Marduk obtained his preeminence in the Babylonian pantheon at this early period. But some authorities deny the existence of monotheistic conceptions among the Babylonians at that time, and attribute Marduk's kingship of the gods to the influence of the political situation of the time, when Babylon first became the capital of the country, and mistress of the greater part of the known world. Material for deciding this question is wanting, but it may be safely said that whatever monotheistic conceptions existed at that time, their acceptance was confined entirely to the priests and scribes. They certainly find no expression in the popular religious texts. Both the source of the original form of the legend of the fight between Ea and Apsu, and Marduk and Tiamat, and the period of its composition are unknown, but there is no doubt that in one form or another it persisted in Mesopotamia for thousands of years. The apocryphal book of Bel and the Dragon shows that a form of the legend was in existence among the Babylonian Jews long after the captivity, and the narrative relating to it associates it with religious observances. But there is no foundation whatsoever for the assertion which has so often been made that the two accounts of the creation which are given in the early chapters in Genesis are derived from the 7 tablets of creation described in the preceding pages. It is true that there are many points of resemblance between the narratives in cuneiform and Hebrew, and these often illustrate each other, but the fundamental conceptions of the Babylonian and Hebrew accounts are essentially different. In the former, the earliest beings that existed were foul demons and devils, and the God of creation only appears at a later period, but in the latter the conception of God is that of a being who existed in and from the beginning, almighty and alone, and the devils of chaos and evil are his servants. Among the primitive Semitic peoples there were probably many versions of the story of the creation, and the narrative told by the 7 tablets is, no doubt, one of them in a comparatively modern form. It is quite clear that the account of the creation given in the 7 tablets is derived from very ancient sources, and a considerable amount of literary evidence is now available for reconstructing the history of the legend. Thus in the Sumerian account the narrative of the exploits of the hero called Ziusudu 19 begins with a description of the creation and then goes on to describe a flood, and there is little doubt that certain passages in this text are the originals of the Babylonian version as given in the 7 tablets. In the story of Ziusudu, however, there is no mention of any dragon. And there is reason to think that the legend of the dragon had originally nothing whatever to do with the creation, for the texts of fragments of 2 distinct accounts 20 of the creation describe a fight between a dragon and some deity other than Marduk. In other accounts the dragon bears a strong resemblance to the Leviathan of Psalm Civilian 26, Job Xli 1. In one text he is said to be 50 bairu 21 in length, and 1 bairu in thickness. His mouth was 6 cubits, about 9 feet, wide, and the circumference of his ears 12 cubits, 18 feet. He was slain by a god whose name is unknown, and the blood continued to flow from his body for 3 years, 3 months, 1 day and 1 night. In the second text the dragon is 60 bairu long and his thickness is 30 bairu. The diameter of each eye is half a bairu, and his paws are 20 bairu long. Thus there is every reason for believing that the legend as it is given in the 7 tablets is the work of some editor, who added the legend of the creation to the legend of the dragon in much the same way as the editor of the Gilgamesh legends included an account of the deluge in his narrative of the exploits of his hero. All forms of the legend of the creation and of the dragon were popular in Babylonia, and one of them achieved so much notoriety that the priest employed recited it as an incantation to charm away the toothache. The literary form of the text of the 7 tablets fulfills the requirements of Semitic poetry in general. The lines usually fall into couplets, the second line being the antiphon of the first, e.g., "When in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name." Each line, or verse, falls into 2 halves, and a well-marked caesura divides each line, or verse, into 2 equally accented parts. And the half-lines can be further resolved into 2 halves, each containing a single accented word or phrase. This is proved by Tablet Spartoli 2, 265a, where the scribe writes his lines and spaces the words in such a way as to show the subdivision of the lines. Thus we have Inuma elish la nabu shamamu shaplish amatum shuma la zakrak. Here there is clearly a rhythm which resembles that found in the poems of the Syrians and Arabs, but there are many instances of its inconsistent use in several parts of the text. Both rhyme and alliteration appear to be used occasionally.